Merry Christmas, one and all, to all the who's far and near. Christmas joy on this blessed day. Not a single word of that rhymes. Another marathon comes to a close today, and as I predicted, there's not a single person who guessed the final video correctly. Something I like to do on the final day of the marathon is talk about a game that either means a lot to ROM hacking in general, or to me specifically. So the first marathon I successfully completed, I spoke about the Mother 3 fan translation. A valiant group effort to bring a Japan-only RPG into the English language such that people who don't have the patience to learn a whole new language can play the game as well. There were a couple of years where I spoke about a game of my own creation, such as the RPG classic Robotnik's Mighty Pingers or MarioGame.exe. And of course, last year I spoke about Toby Fox's Earthbound Halloween hack, a very strange game without which we may never have gotten Undertale or Deltarune. And one year I actually spoke about 3 very special Super Mario 64 ROM hacks, those being Super Mario 74, Super Mario Star Road, and Last Impact. All in their own ways, these are games that mean a lot to Super Mario 64 ROM hacking, and to me. I had technically spoken about these games in the past, but it was long since time for a revisit. And this year, I'm doing it again. I am going back to the first ROM hack I ever reviewed. This is Kaza's Super Donkey Kong 64. I haven't played this game in years, and going back to it was hugely nostalgic to say the least, but before I actually talk about it, I want to talk about this video first. When I first made this video, it never occurred to me that fan games and ROM hacks would explode so dramatically in such a short time. So while I did imagine myself playing more of them, and I said in the video that I would be playing as many as possible, I wasn't sure just how viable that would actually be. In fact, the original plan for the channel was to make a bunch of videos about Metal Gear because I was a huge Metal Gear fan at the time, and even though I still am today, it was a little bit easier to be a fan back then. The dream was that Metal Gear Solid 5 would come out and I would start talking about that, and then I would talk about all the new Metal Gear games that would come after it. Of course, the problem with making videos about new Metal Gears is that there actually have to be some that aren't fucking stupid. That, and I didn't have a capture device back then, and I had the game on PS4, so I couldn't even get my own footage. I guess there might have been a way to do it using the share feature, but I mean, come on now, who wants to do that? Admittedly, ROM hacks in this context were almost like a subject of convenience in the beginning. You know, I already had emulators, I had fraps, my computer could run those things, and I knew how to use them, so yeah. Of course, that fact only becomes more evident when watching the video. Revisiting this video almost 10 years later, I kinda almost want to close my eyes and jam my fingers into my ears.
Do you guys remember Donkey Kong 64? That 3D platformer where you play as 5 different monkeys to collect bananas and beat up a giant alligator?
On a technical level, there is just so much wrong with it. The Project 64 footage is stretched out to 16:9 because I didn't know how to put it in the proper aspect ratio. Hell, I didn't even think it looked particularly bad back then. The editing is extremely basic because I was using Windows Movie Maker, which can barely do anything with anything. Like, I don't even think you could put clips on top of other clips. My voice sounded terrible because I was recording with the USB microphone that comes with Rock Band, and the actual things that I'm saying are stupid.
Seriously, click on anyone else's Mario 64 videos. They're all like, oh, you guys, this was like the best thing back in the day.
Right off the bat, I'm talking shit about other YouTubers for talking about how Mario 64 was the game of their childhood, as though I'm somehow any better than them.
Now, if you don't know what that means, it basically means, yes, people have made their own Mario 64 games.
I have no clue what's going on with my voice in this video, but I assume what's happening is that I'm holding the mic close to my chest and tilting my head downwards so my words get stuck in my throat, as well as the fact that I was probably recording really late at night after my homework was done.
Then when you consider that Donkey Kong 64 had you find 200 golden bananas, the game looks even shorter. Then again, some are long and some are short, but in the end, it's how it performs that matters.
Okay, well that joke just isn't very funny at all. And then there's this part where I'm very obviously using save states without even trying to hide it. If there is an upside to this video, I did briefly mention how cool it is that the game has new power-ups, which I accurately pointed out was rare for the time, but in retrospect, I feel like I undersold it, all things considered. And that's on top of all the technical incompetency and terrible voiceover. I actually considered reinstalling Movie Maker for this video just for fun, but I legitimately cannot imagine editing anything on that piece of software anymore. But I do, however, have the Rock Band mic lying around, so let's see how that sounds. I am Morgan Freeman, and today we will be talking about, Super Mario Man. ROMhack Man. I don't know what a ROMhack is. I don't know where I am. Why am I here? Where is here? In a weird way, though, this all feels kinda poetic, because I have to imagine that as far as Kaza has come with all his ROM hacking efforts in the decade since making Super Donkey Kong 64 in the first place, that his attitude towards it may be pretty similar to my attitude towards the review that I made about it.
If you're a Donkey Kong 64 fan, I think maybe you should check it out. If not, this game is probably not that fun, which is why I think it also deserves a C tier.
Even his attitude towards Last Impact, a game that is better than Super Donkey Kong 64 in many respects, doesn't seem particularly enthusiastic. When that came out, I could not believe a Super Mario 64 ROM hack could have reached those heights, but even he admitted that the game ended up being largely a showcase for his custom coding skills, without considering whether or not it would actually be fun to play.
I don't think I've ever suffered as much as I did for this hack here.
A lot of time has passed since then. I now use DaVinci Resolve, which means I can do this. I started learning Blender, which means I can make fancy 3D intros and outros. I got a blue snowball mic, which should probably get upgraded soon. I learned how to record games in the aspect ratio they're supposed to be in. I got a capture device that works very well when the Elgato capture software isn't being a hoe. And while I wouldn't say my commentary is perfect, I feel strongly that my observations are generally a little more insightful and intelligent than they were back then.
Super Mario 64 is a game that needs no introduction. And for that reason, I won't give it one, because I'm not like all the other YouTubers.
Pretentious to the end.
And while that was happening, Kaza managed to tear apart Mario's source code and rebuild it into an extremely tightly optimized program, allowing the game to look like this while somehow also running at high frame rates on real hardware, not to mention developing a much more firm grasp on game design fundamentals. To be clear, I think that is a much greater accomplishment than learning how to make YouTube videos that don't look and sound like complete garbage, but the point is growth and change. And with the Christmas season, of course, comes the end of the year, a time of reflection. Suffice it to say, revisiting this game and the video I made about it was an exercise of reflection for me. Going from Super Donkey Kong 64 to Kaza's later works like Peach's Fury, it's like a whole different league. Likewise, while I can't say I'm super proud of a lot of my videos from back in the day, I can say that I'm proud of the hour-long Metal Gear Solid 5 video that I made back in September, and of course the Banjo Nuts and Bolts video from October, and I'm really thankful that they did so well. And I'm glad to have made something that I can say that about. It's a pretty great feeling. And with all that sentimentality out of the way, let's talk about Super Donkey Kong 64. Super DK64 is a ROM hack of Super Mario 64 that drops Mario into the land of Donkey Kong Island. The levels are taken straight from Donkey Kong with maybe some small modifications where needed. Now I think for a lot of people this would have been cool enough on its own. This ROM hack could easily have just sprinkled some stars here and there and maybe added a couple of blocks to accommodate for the abilities that the Kongs have that Mario does not. And it would probably still be a lot of fun. But instead, this game does something unique, especially for the time it was released, by giving Mario these all-new moves and abilities. Each star you collect gives you star power, which can then be traded at Cranky's lab for a new upgrade. You can turn metal for a couple of seconds whenever you want, which has a low cooldown so you can experiment with it without fear. You got this spinning dive move that lets you get across dangerous hazards, and this super bounce move that lets you get to high places. These abilities are new to Super Mario 64, but not in a way that they distract from the foundational appeals of the original game. This can be a tricky thing to pull off for ROM hacks, the balance of brand new ideas while maintaining what made the original fun in the first place. It seems this lesson may have been painfully learned for Kaza based on his own reflections upon Last Impact. And while Super Donkey Kong doesn't always stick the landing, it never feels far too alien to the game it's built upon. There are even some areas where you can do things more than one way. The way you're expected to get this star here is by creating platforms using a switch. But if you position yourself just right, you can get it using the super bounce maneuver. That's one of the things that made Mario 64 special in the first place, so if anything should be retained in a ROM hack, it's gotta be that, whether it was intentional or not. Yes, the hack is still very old, and there are definitely areas where more should have been done to accommodate Mario's moveset in a world that wasn't built for him. There are jumps that you can barely make even with the fancy maneuvers, but I will say the game is a little less janky than I remember it being. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that I actually know how to play the game better, which is a roundabout way of saying that I know what silly kicking is now. Turns out that games can be more fun when you actually know how to play them. Who knew? In all seriousness, I was expecting to get stuck on the geometry every 2 seconds, but I only experienced a small handful of game-ending bugs on my last playthrough. I mean, that's still not ideal, but it could have been a lot worse. One thing I appreciate a lot about the game is how Cranky's lab acts as a fast travel hub where you can travel between levels, which ends up making it a lot more efficient than the game that it's riffing on. This is much appreciated because Donkey Kong 64 is often frowned upon for excessive backtracking and traversal issues. The game in general is a lot more efficient than Donkey Kong, with each level having 7 stars, many of which are just waiting for you to grab them with no elaborate puzzle involved whatsoever. There are some more elaborate ones that require you to use your head, and one that you probably would never find without talking to this guy first, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. In terms of presentation, it's obvious the textures and level geometry aren't meant to be in Mario 64, with some of the awkward mapping and the lack of proper lighting effects, but honestly, it's kind of impressive that Mario 64's engine is able to use these textures at all. I even remember thinking that back when I first reviewed it. But what really steals the show is the remixed tunes, which sound great in the Mario 64 sound font. I mean, if I'm being honest, some are definitely better than others, but it's nice to hear Grant Kirkhope's compositions with Mario 64's iconic instruments. When all is said and done, Super Donkey Kong 64 is better than I remember it being, albeit a little wonky in more than a few areas. It's a ROM hack that is definitely far from flawless, but it was a learning experience, not so different from the video that I made about it. It was one of many stepping stones to refining the craft, and that will always be important. And in a few ways, that could be said of many of the ROM hacks and fan games I spoke about in the past. A lot of them were made by very experienced people, and other ones may have been made with less experience, but no matter how skilled the respective creators were, they were all learning. And that's the truth. We're never really done learning or growing. This is true, no matter what games you're modding, riffing on, or playing. And that just goes to show that no matter what games we enjoy, every gamer can get along with each other. Except for fans of a certain game. You know which game I'm talking about.